the forgiveness is the freedom of letting go. Because we allow people to live in our minds. Yes, we were hurt, but we're the ones that let it continue by letting it live in our minds and our hearts. And so the bridge of forgiveness is traveling through that and letting go and saying, I've had enough of this. I'm done. And setting not only yourself free, but that person free.
Hello and welcome to the Inspired Woman Podcast. I'm Marcy Narum. This podcast is dedicated to impacting a multitude of women with its mission to celebrate, encourage, empower, educate, entertain, and connect women. This episode is brought to you by Photos by JC. If you're looking for a fun, no-pressure photo shoot where you actually enjoy being in front of the camera, give JC Vogelweed a call. She specializes in families and seniors. Check her out at photosbyjc.com. It's my privilege today to introduce the first podcast interview with an inspired woman cover girl, Ruth Knutson. Thank you for being here today, Ruth.
Thank you so much for having me, Marcy.
Yeah, and thanks for being a cover girl as well. Your story is a powerful and really incredible story. And, for most of us, we'd have to say it takes a lot of courage and strength to share that story. It's something you've been sharing for a few years now, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Started out with, was it at a women's conference that you spoke about?
Yeah, it was at a women's conference, and I was asked by Mikey and Val, and they said, well, would you be interested in sharing your story? And right away I said, yes, I'll share it on forgiveness. And so there's where the journey began.
Okay. So the story, for those who are listening, it's in Inspired Woman magazine in the March issue 2019. And it's the focus really is about forgiveness and the journey of your life growing up. So we're not going to go over the story again, but I want to just dive a little bit deeper. And if we can start even with your decision to share that story. What led you to that decision that you want to talk about your life growing up in a really difficult home life situation and foster care and abuse and alcoholism? How did you get to that point?
It's been a long journey, and I think the first part of the journey is running away from your life. The first part is this didn't happen to me, and just moving on. And then there comes this roadblock where all of a sudden everything in your life starts to fall apart. And in the story I talk about that. That's with finding out that my mom is going to pass away from lung cancer. So once that was open, at the same time I was separated, so I had my separation. My mother was dying, and I thought this is a time to reconnect with her, and this is a time to travel through forgiveness. And it's easy to read about forgiveness. It's not so easy to do. And so I think for me, I thought I've read all the right books. I know all the right pieces. But the problem is that when you are in the same place with a person that you need to forgive, your body speaks very much different. Your heart and mind aren't necessarily the same. And I was frozen the first time that I saw my mom. It was hard for me. I went to I went to the hospital, and her diagnosis was a couple months. And so I had to do a lot of self-talk and a lot of getting myself to go ahead and go over to the bed and talk to her. And I thought, this is my opportunity to get to know her as a person and to travel through forgiveness. So I don't say forgiveness is easy. It's not. It is definitely a journey. You have to walk through the pain to get to the other side.
Can you just shed a little bit of light on that pain and getting to know her?
I think for me, I invited her to Bismarck. I also share that in the story. And really, it was very ulterior motive. And that was, I really thought she was going to apologize. I thought she was going to say she was sorry for all the hurt and all the pain. And we had a very nice weekend, but really didn't talk much in depth. I started to see her as a very vulnerable person. I think when you start to see somebody and they're towards the end of life, you start to soften. And I just loved her as a person. And when we were driving home back to Minot, I thought, yay, here's my opportunity. I am going to go down memory lane and I am going to get what I need. And so I started asking questions about, do you remember when this happened or that happened? And out of the corner of my eye, I saw that there was nothing there. She had no memories. And all of a sudden, it was a light bulb moment for me, and that is, my mom had never been my mom, but in that moment, I had a choice to be her daughter. And I chose that. And all of a sudden, this incredible amount of peace passed over me. My mother didn't see me as a child. I don't think she intentionally was out to hurt me or my siblings. I think between the disease of addiction and between some of her own mental health issues, she really didn't have a memory. So what I was looking for wasn't there. That was something that had to come from me, which forgiveness comes from oneself and not from the other person. So the apology didn't come, but I did have some special moments with her before she passed.
What had it been like for you before that? So you had grown up, in the home of addiction, and then some foster care after that, and getting to that point of hoping to have that apology from your mom. Did you have feelings of resentment?
Lots of resentment, lots of bitterness, lots of anger. And but what I did is I stuffed all of that, and I went on with my life. And really in my own foolishness thinking that was gone. And you don't realize that it bleeds over into your everyday life. We don't realize that the past is there. And so encounters, interactions with other people, maybe things that you typically wouldn't get mad about, you get angry about. Thinking that somebody's out to harm you in some way, or when the truth is it's unresolved pain from the past. And grievances that you haven't worked through and you haven't dealt with. And so for me, the moment that came crushing down was in my 30s when, like I said, it was a perfect storm between my mother dying and being separated and everything. When I went to my minister, he's like, you need to get into therapy. You've opened up a can of worms, which I kept tightly closed, which I think anytime you come from a very difficult childhood, you put it in the closet and you shut the door and you hope nobody opens it. But when pain comes rushing back into your life, that's when the tales of the past come right along with it. And in cases you'll see where people have exaggerated emotions about something going on in their life, most of the time it's unresolved issues along with what's going on in the present. So for me, everything came flooding back at once. And it was time to sit down and get the work done. And so I was very blessed and lucky to have an incredible therapist and many times when I went to her office, I just cried. And that was allowing myself permission to cry, going back and grieving for the child in me, going back and walking through the pain and getting to the other side as an adult and not as a child. And that then there made me decide to go into counseling myself and look at addiction and understand the disease of it. Instead of having so much bitterness towards my mom and thinking that my mom could just stop what she was doing, it wasn't that simple. And so for me, I needed the pieces to understand. I needed to look deeper. And I am so full of gratitude that I had the opportunity to go back to college, because that was always a dream of mine, was to graduate. And so, and be able to work in the field. And I've met many wonderful people in treatment.
And do you continue to do some counseling with clients or?
Actually, I'm not working any longer, but I have to tell you, I've been very fortunate to have people call me, have family members come over and visit with me, to understand addiction, to look at where can they get treatment, what's the best treatment, where can the family get treatment. So even though I don't sit behind a desk, I'm always working in one way or another.
Yeah. It's just kind of living a calling. I would imagine.
Exactly. Exactly.
Talking about deciding to go to see a therapist that has to be a huge point of vulnerability right there, even just to say, I need help. And, for somebody who is afraid maybe of even admitting that, what words of advice or encouragement can you give?
I think for me, as I've always thought of myself as an extremely strong person, and to say that I need help admits that I'm weak. But the truth is, therapy is the greatest gift that you give yourself. It's a way that, in getting to learn who you are, what is it that makes you you, the more that I work through my own pain, the better I am to be present with someone else's. And so it is not a weakness. It is courage and strength to go and face the things, the pain, and it's such a raw vulnerability that is, wow. I mean, there's times that I got done with therapy that I had cried so much or didn't sleep all night, and just trying to process everything that was going on and everything that was happening. But I can say to get to the other side was much better than staying on the side of trying to put everything in the closet and things were falling out and destroying my marriage and destroying my life. And, if we don't transform our pain, we transfer it. And hurting people hurt people. So at what point in our lives do we say the hurt stops here? At what point do we face and say, you know what? I want to have a much freer road, and I want to have the freedom to love fully. Because for me, one of the things that I realized in therapy is that part of my heart had been blocked. I didn't trust. I couldn't give anybody my complete self because I always had to save something because I never knew when things were going to fall apart. And so becoming completely vulnerable and opening up and cleaning out the black soot within your own heart and being able to say, ooh, that kind of hurts there, this hurts there. And I think as a therapist, it makes you a better therapist if you have looked at your own things and you've looked at yourself, so you're not transferring that to a client, or you're not, I didn't want, when I was working in addiction, to look at a female client as my mother. I wanted to work through the issues that I had with my mother, so I wasn't transferring or projecting those onto somebody else. So I think it's a journey within yourself. It's a journey of recovery, and most of us are recovering from something.
This didn't just happen in a month, Ruth. How long did you?
It was a year of therapy.
Okay.
And when things, and you might go to therapy once. I went to therapy twice. So I went for a year, and then I went back several years later when some other issues were coming up in my life. And so I just encourage people, it is a gift that keeps on giving.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. You probably learned some things that, is it coping? Some coping tools?
I think you get some tools in your toolbox, but you learn to have compassion and understanding for yourself. Mm-hmm. I mean, I think all of us can beat ourselves up. And as well as forgiving others, there's people that need to forgive us. And so there's things that we have to forgive ourselves for. And so it's a process. It's I think looking at things and not wanting to beat myself up and letting things roll off my shoulder and laugh about things, laugh at myself, being comfortable in situations.
You mentioned we talked about your mother. You're a mom?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
Tell me about your family.
So I have been very blessed with 5 kids. Now added to that is 2 daughter-in-laws and a son-in-law and 5 grandchildren. And so I have to pinch myself because one of my prayers as a child is, God, please let me have my own family one day. And so I do not take that for granted at all. I am like, wow. I mean, I went to a meeting and the psychologist said, tell me who your heroes are. And he was expecting people to say like Gandhi and Buddha and Jesus. And I said, my kids. And he just looked at me and he didn't know what to say. And so he wanted to put words in my mouth. And at the end of the day, I think, it's my kids. I think when you grow up and you don't have a family and you live in foster care and you live in other families, you get it when you have a family. And you know what an incredible gift it is. And what a huge responsibility it is to try to teach and to try to help them find their dreams, what their path is and what their goal is, and to be a guide. And so I read parenting, I took developmental psych, cognitive psych, I educated myself. And I took all of the pieces of the foster homes I was in, the things that went right or went wrong within my childhood experiences, and used all of that to be the best parent that I possibly could be. Does that mean that my husband and I are perfect? Absolutely not. We've done a lot of things wrong and a lot of things right. And we just, love our kids where they're at. And that alone is a journey within itself, too, to be a parent and to be present with your kids. And now I get to do it all over again with grandkids, and it's even sweeter because I get to really be the hero and not the one that's disciplining all the time. So I get to be kind of naughty sometimes and say, we're going to do this, or yes, you can have that chocolate bar, or yes, you can have this because it's you and I today. And so it's a beautiful thing.
It is wonderful. Do you want to talk about your dad?
My dad really wasn't in the picture. I did ask my mom who he was, and I met him when I was in junior high, and he was so afraid that I wanted something financially from him. And so he really was very gamey. And then I went back when I was in high school again to meet him with my boyfriend, who's now my husband, Ron, and he was very gamey. And Ron said, I don't think you need to come back. And so I talked to him one more time as an adult, but he had never been married. He also had the issue of alcoholism. And I was fortunate enough after he passed to have spent several hours with his nephew, going over family photos, going over the history of his life, which I just basically wanted to know, number one, are you Norwegian? Are you, what was health issues within your family? So that was an extreme gift. I realized I was named after a sister of his. And so that's really all I wanted to know, was more about who was he? And his nephew gave me that gift. So
wonderful. Yeah. So what about siblings?
So I have an older brother, Jerry, and I had a younger sister, Sandy, and I have 2 younger brothers. Sandy ran away at 16, and I only heard from her on and off through the years. She died at 49 of cirrhosis of the liver. She had been homeless on and off. Here's the thing that I think is crazy. I mean, we like to define people one way or another, but I look back at Sandy and I think when she did have a home, she was always bringing homeless people home to her house. And I think, how many people in her life did she help? More than I think I could imagine. Was she able to be stable within her own life? No. She had 2 children. She had 3 children, a son that died early childhood, about age 2, same as my sister. And then she had a daughter who was raised by her dad, and then later in life had another daughter that was adopted by a family in California. So I have been blessed have been blessed that in one of the phone calls my sister made, she had a telephone number for both girls. So then I was in contact with both of those families and able to send pictures and Christmas cards. And about 2 years ago, the two girls met for the first time. They're both adults now. And for me, that was such an awesome thing to be part of and to witness and to see the pieces of my sister and both of them. It was overpowering. And so now those two are connected with each other. And I have a relationship with both of them and have been to California a couple times to visit with Katie, who was adopted, and have a good relationship with her adoptive parents. And so, yeah, it's been amazing.
The beauty that can come.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, if you're open and your heart is open, it's amazing where you're led. And then my brother, three strikes, you're out. He had his third DUI. He was in college trying to get his life back together, a junior in college, and had his third DUI and was looking at doing prison time. And so he fled, and I didn't hear from him for probably 20 years, only had one phone call from him, wouldn't tell me where he was at, what was going on. And then a few years ago, he had a major stroke. And by the grace of God, somehow I found out about it. And there was high levels of meth in his blood system. But he is now in a nursing home, and I know that sounds bad, but the nursing home is such a loving, caring place. And I've been there to visit him several times. And he is just in his element. He, too, has been homeless at times. I do not know his whole journey. I'm not sure because of the stroke he can't go back there or because of shame. But he's joking with the staff. He's joking with the residents. He doesn't have to worry about where his next meal is going to come. He doesn't have to worry about if someone's going to harm him. It's probably the first time in years that he's been sober and maintained that sobriety. And it's just been a joy to watch him blossom, too. And he is just starting his journey of forgiveness.
Wow.
So
that must mean a lot to you.
It does.
It does. To know that. So the forgiveness factor is the article, and that's really, I think, at the core of your message. I mean, your life could have gone
either
way, completely different way, Ruth, right?
Either way.
But so it was a choice.
You know, I would have to say that faith played a huge part, and you know, and my grandmother, I think, and being able to learn from other people and taking social cues, and saying, I want my life to be different. I want this to be written different. But also there was a lot of wonderful girlfriends in my life who had different stories, who their home life was different. And I spent a lot of time there. And so saying, you know, I think like when you talk to a businessman and you say to him, how did you become successful? Well, I read this person and that person, and I had this person was my mentor. For me, it was looking at other homes and other lives. And so, and always learning and always being open to learning.
Explain that. Other homes and other lives.
So, like one girlfriend, I think I in the article, it stated, you know, I knew Saturday nights was bath night. Mm-hmm. And so for me, I knew that meant I was going to have clean clothes. I was going to have a bath. I was going to feel good about myself. I was going to go to church on Sunday with them. There was always food, there was chores, there was rules, there was structure in their life, which I did not have any structure. And so I gravitated towards that, and I gravitated towards people that had both parents in their lives, had a mom and a dad. And so I just soaked it all in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. What has been the response when you've shared your story, like at a speaking engagement, or even since this story's been published? How have people responded to hearing your story?
I think people are really surprised. I think we all think it's somebody else down the block. I think we think abuse, alcoholism, it looks different. It's defined different. People in foster care are one way or another. We don't look at that. For me, being in foster care, especially when I got to junior high and high school, living in a group home, people right away assume that you've done something wrong. You've either been stealing, you've been doing this, you've been doing that. What have you done wrong? And so people don't think about what did they come from. That the person is hurting, the person is vulnerable, the person, you already don't feel good enough about yourself. And so any added extra attention or teasing or, just makes things worse. It's hard to get above it. Like for me growing up, and this is one thing I learned going back to school, especially in the social work, getting my social work degree, is I didn't realize that when people have trauma in their lives in childhood, you have gaps in learning. So I had huge gaps in learning. I had gaps in reading. I had gaps in mathematics. The early stages of learning were blank for me because school was a safe place. It was a place to catch a nap. It was a place to just know that I was safe. And so that was a light bulb moment for me because I felt like I was always trying to catch up. I had to memorize words. I had to memorize, even going back to college, memorizing everything. It was like, there's so many pieces lost and not understanding. Instead, you define pieces being lost is that you're not very bright. So I always knew I was street smart because you have to learn to read your environment because when you grow up with abuse, in order to be safe, you walk on eggshells or you read who's coming through the door in order to self-protect. And so I think learning that there is gaps in learning is a huge thing. And now they're actually tackling that in social work and other places. PATH does a great job with wraparound services that help people catch up in those areas. The public school system, all of that, are catching up and looking where the gaps are.
I want to spend a little time talking about something in the article. You shared some tips on forgiveness. Yes. Can we talk about that? Forgiveness is the bridge between hurting and healing.
It's huge. For me, I ran away from my life for a long time. And I was married and I was happy till I wasn't. And everything appeared to be going well until it wasn't. And the forgiveness is the freedom of letting go because we allow people to live in our minds. Yes, we were hurt, but we're the ones that let it continue by letting it live in our minds and our hearts. And so the bridge of forgiveness is traveling through that and letting go and saying, I've had enough of this. I'm done. And setting not only yourself free, but that person free. And so sometimes forgiveness, in my case, I was fortunate enough to be able to work through it personally with my mother. And then in the story, I talk about my stepdad. But in other cases in my life, never would I confront the person and never would I say that is the thing to do. Forgiveness is self-work. It's something sometimes you just have to do all by yourself because it would do more harm than good to put yourself in a position of being alone with that person. Mm-hmm. And sometimes you're the one to blame. In some cases, so when you go and ask somebody and say, I forgive you, and they have no idea what you're forgiving. Uh-huh. So, those are really some things that, you have to think about.
Sure. So, do you want to talk about some of the steps in the process, or?
Yes. Forgiving is for you and not necessarily for the offender. So that's the gift that you give to yourself. And forgiveness is like a muscle. It's trainable. So for me to go back into my history and forgive some big things, when I'm standing in a grocery store line and either the checkout person is short with me or whatever, I am going to make sure that I'm going to be extra nice because I don't know what kind of day they're having. And I'm not going to own what's going on with them, but I'm going to try to brighten their day. If I'm in my car and somebody cuts me off, instead of letting that take me down some other road, I'm going to forgive them and think that something's probably going on in their life and let that go. Mm-hmm. Everyone can learn to forgive. Forgiveness is a choice that we choose. And forgiveness is taking back your power. I mean, I talk about having the moment with my stepdad when my mom passed away, and I had no idea how much was locked up inside of me until I said, I forgive you. And I walked away, and my body had this incredible release by shaking and crying and feeling like I was going to fall to the ground. And so I don't know what it did for him. That's really none of my business, but I know what it did for me. And that was letting go of a lot of different things that had got tagged along with that through the years. Forgiveness does not mean you give up having feelings. And forgiveness does also not mean to forgive is to forget. And in the case of my mother, I forgave my mother, but it didn't mean that I was going to bring my kids over and have her babysit them. Mm-hmm. I mean, I didn't go to sleep. You know, I loved her and I forgave her, but I wouldn't set my kids up for a situation that I wouldn't be guaranteed what the outcome would be. Mm-hmm. And forgiveness is not excusing poor behavior.
It's a good reminder, yeah. Ruth, I like to end with asking the question. It's our tagline with Inspired Woman. She believed she could, so she did. And where in your life would that apply for you?
Boy, that would apply in so many different stages. And I think each one of them so powerful. A couple would be as a 6th grader when I walked out the door and went into foster care permanently. And at that moment said to myself, anything that happens here on in my life is my responsibility.
Wow.
And I would, so many times I think to be a mother and to love my children and to admit when I'm wrong and to say sorry in those moments where it's not always easy to say I'm sorry and to say I'm wrong. And going back to college, that was huge. That was a huge fear factor for me, with all the not believing and knowing that I did and I could.
Wonderful. Thank you for sharing your story. It's one of courage and beauty and peace, really. There's a peace about it, and I think we can all take something from it.
Thank you so much for having me.
The Inspired Woman podcast is sponsored by Quantum Productions, the home of the award-winning director and cinematographer Nolan Johnson. He creates unique high-end video products throughout the Midwest. You can check him out at quantumprond.com.